Welcome to another episode of the Terrain Studio. I'm your host, Sean Morris. On this month's tutorial, we're going to be talking a little bit about prepping substrate with some Celluclay product, talking a little bit about an in-house mix that I use that I apply to ground cover, and then we're going to get into some flocking techniques that I use and have used on the Kashyyyk project. So let's get into it. All right, with any project, you want to make sure you're selecting a product that's going to be conducive to the end result that you're looking for. Do you want a flat landscape? Are you looking for some undulation? Are you looking for a hard coat? Are you looking for a soft coat? Are you trying to carve into your foam, etc., etc.? So for this, we're going to be talking about ground cover. So some of the attributes I look for are sort of hard surfaces, something that's going to have some undulation, and something that's going to take both paint, ink, and eventually your ground covering, whether it's paste or flock, quite liberally. So we're going to want to make sure that we select the appropriate platform. For this, I'm going to use foam, as I typically do, and this one I'm going with a 1-inch foam here, just something nice and rigid. I've prepared some things off camera. One of the things about this tutorial is it has a significant number of drying steps in between, and so I'm going to try to expedite some of that, but also show you some, via the magic of the video, some accelerated processes. But before we get into that, let's talk about the substrate material that we're going to use. Now, it's a little hard to see here because it's white on white, but this is the Celluclay. It's kind of a dry, sort of, an artist level paper mache, so it's clean. You can make this stuff if you want. I just really like the clean mix of this, and it's in kind of a powdery mix already. It does create a little bit of residue. As you can see, the powder sort of moves around, so if you're going to use a lot of this, make sure that you are going to have a nice ventilated area. What I do with this, and I don't use the box instructions because I feel like the dilution rate of water to Celluclay is a bit watery, and so I typically go by feel. I have some mixed up to kind of show you what I work with. You can always add a bit more water or material back and forth. Just make sure that you're not doing that excessively so you end up with so much extra. But once I mix it up, it typically looks like this, and I put this one purposely in a bag last night just to show you that you can sort of overnight this and save some of the material. So let me just ball this back up here. So the material itself, you can see it's quite saturated. If I squeeze this, it will definitely have some water come out of it. I'll do that just to show you. There's some liquid squeezing out. And so this material is ready to prep and apply. And so you can see it sort of keeps this semi-gelatinous sort of form. I can break it apart easily, and I can also smush it together to get some application. So this is kind of how I like to prepare mine. Now, I just apply it right straight to my substrate. You'll see I'll just kind of squish it down here. And I like to use my fingers as my primary sort of method to disperse it. However, I do also use sculpting tools, and they just let you make the sort of fine form manipulations. And what I'm trying to do here is get good adhesion to the surface, and it will create a nice adhesion once it's dry. But however, I can just easily move that at this point as well, right? Because there is no straight adhesion when it's this wet. So you can manipulate this for quite some time. This material does surface dry, and then it will basically leach out the water over the coming days. It does take some period of time to dry, upwards of a couple days, depending on how thick you do it. So when you're moving it around and manipulating it, like I said, you can just create your surfaces, your indentations, your impressions, however you want. Now, this material will kind of maintain this sort of like oatmeal or sort of cottage cheese look. And it won't give you a super smooth surface. However, you can, after some time, start to manipulate and start to smooth it out if you want to take out some of the smaller ripples. I don't use this as my straight ground surface. I always treat this with something else, either a paste or a flock, or some of the homebrew mixture that we're going to talk about. So I don't really worry about how that looks. However, if you are going to apply it, it would be good for maybe an asphalt-like surface, a volcanic-like surface. But if you're going to go kind of straight ground cover and like hope to replicate some sort of smooth surface, you're not really going to get it with this material. So I don't recommend it for that specifically. So once you have it down and you start sort of manipulating and get it into your form that you want, you're going to end up with something that looks a little bit like these. Now, these I did last night, and you can see how I have some sort of smooth texture to these. I also definitely have some clear undulations as I move those around. You can see the various thicknesses. Some of them have a little bit more thick forms than others. these are not quite dry. I can still actually manipulate and put the impressions in these, although they have been drying for about, I'd say approximately maybe 16 hours at this point. I haven't forced any drying, I didn't heat this up or anything like that. I just put it outside so that I had a little bit of wind flow over it and a little bit of ambient heat. This one is a little bit softer still because it's a lot thicker. I did a third one for the purposes of the video, and this one I left relatively flat. So you can see here I have some surface. This one, you can hear, is actually hardened. So this one's hardened surface. It's got a nice hard coat to this. I can't really press or indent this, and any indentation that I am making is actually just pressing the foam underneath as opposed to actually manipulating the Celluclay. So we're going to use this one for the next step in this process. We're going to go ahead and work on this and do our preparation to this surface. However, just know that you can apply it thick and create those undulations. You just have to have a little bit more patience and a little bit more dry time to get to this level of hardness, although that will result. It doesn't matter how thick you do, it will get you some hard surface. I will caution against this. Just a small aside here with talking about the cracking and the drying of the material. So occasionally what will happen is over time you will get some cracking that occurs in the thicker portions of the drying process. That's actually just the material itself. As you can see, that paper mache is made up of smaller materials, and so you'll get an actual sort of crack that will form as the material just separates. And sometimes what you can do is work those cracks into your design, but if they're not conducive to your design or ground cover, all you have to do is go back and fill those either in with some more Celluclay, or you can use some acrylic paste or something similar, even glue and put it over top of that if you're later going to apply another material. So don't worry if you do get some cracking in some of the thicker portions. As you can see, when you lay it out nice and thin, it's really rare that you get any cracking at all. And even in the thicker portions, again, it's going to be pretty much contained to the surface. It's not going to crack all the way through, and you're certainly not going to get any massive delamination or anything like that. But I did want to caution about that step and make sure that if you did have that occur and you're using this material, that you weren't surprised or shocked at the result. So let's get ready to prep the surface. We're going to start with a little bit of paint just to show you how it takes that, and then we're going to show you how I prepare it with a special mixture that I like for things like beach and similar sort of foresty floors. So let's get into that in the next step. All right, guys, welcome back. We are going to start prepping up some of this surface, and I'm going to show you a couple ways to do it. So you've created sort of your flat surface. Like I said, it's all nice and dry, and you just basically want to go ahead and apply some paint because you're just going to put flock straight on here. I'm just going to apply a little glob of paint on here. Just to sort of show you. So it's just straight, like, you know, cheap dollar store crafts. As you guys know, I spend money where I need to and not where I have to. If I don't have to spend the money to buy an expensive paint or airbrush paint, I just won't. So you can see here, I'm just applying this straight on, just brushing it out. I want to make sure what I do is get it down in, I'm just using a cheap brush here. I want to make sure that I get it down into the cracks and crevices, because that is quite important, because I don't want to have any of that white sort of shining through. So you can see here how quickly and easily that brushes up. So if you're looking for a textured surface, this is going to do it for you. Now I'm going to show you what you want to try to avoid is this. So if you take your paint right here, right, and you go, and I'm just going to like quickly brush it out, right? So you got to make sure that you don't have all this white, these white patches in here, right? Because now I got to go back in and I got to stipple all those in, start getting rid of those. So you do need to get some coverage on here. You can see the difference between me really going sparingly and then me brushing it out, you know, with a reasonable application. Certainly, yeah, can you brush this 2-3 times? Absolutely. So you can brush this out as many times as you want and get as thick a coat as you want. But what I'm doing is just getting a surface coat so that I can cover the white. I typically don't just straight brush this stuff, except for in the areas that I am going to apply something else, and I'll show you what I mean by something else. I mean something that's got density to it, like a sand or a paste, not where I'm going to put a flock, because I just don't want any of that white to come through that green or similar color. It's going to be really vibrant and really kind of be a beacon of white coming through. So what I actually do is prepare a little mixture, and in this segment I'm going to sort of put that together. So what I do and what I'm going to try to make is this conglomeration, and you guys look at this. It's just gross in here. It's like this oatmeal that's in there, and that looks like absolute disgusting materials, but I will assure you it looks really cool, and I'm going to show you how to make it, or I'm going to tell you how to make it. I'm not really going to mix it up here just because it's messy. So what you're going to start with is you're going to start with sawdust. Now you can get this from like let me get that focus. There we go. You guys can get this from like your own shops, or you can get it from a hardware store. Maybe they have like a saw that they do store in-store cutting. That's actually where I get this. And the reason I get it from there is it's really clean. I don't get this stuff swept off the floor because I don't want all the dirt, hair, bugs, you know, grime, grease, all that good stuff. That's not really good. I don't want any of that in there. So I get this from like a sawdust collection unit, so that it's relatively clean. I don't care if it has like sort of bigger pieces in it. That just sort of adds to the detritus layer I'm going for. So you start with sawdust. Then what you want to do is you want to mix in some sort of adhesive. So I use Liquitex acrylic medium here, and it's molding paste. It's really, really thick. It's like super thick, like, oh, this one's not even open, sorry. It's like super thick like toothpaste. It goes in, it's really hard to sort of mix up after, so you got to get a good stirring stick, and you really got to mix that up. So the autofocus is kind of weird on this sometimes when I move my hands so fast. I got to remember that. Then what I do is I add some scenic cement, this stuff here. This goes in to add some sort of liquid to it. It helps sort of move the flow of the material around and get it sort of mixing together. So you got real thick in the Liquitex, and then you go thinner with the scenic cement, and then we split the difference because we're not trying to really add much more water content to it. We go in with the weld bond after, and so obviously this is a little less viscous than the flex paste. That is the effective flex paste is the name of the Woodland Scenics brand. Liquitex, they have it called, what do they use this? Flexible modeling paste, the same sort of difference. But this is the sort of splits the difference. This has a lot of adhesion, as all of these materials do, but it also gives it a nice sort of a bond. And because it has less water content in this, I'm not introducing a bunch of water that I'm going to have evap off. And sort of really sort of change the drying texture of this. So what it does when you mix it all together and it comes out in this sort of conglomeration, of which we'll put down in the next segment. I'm going to speed up a little bit and then go backwards. This is kind of what it dries out to be. Now, this is the material that's in that container, and I've applied different inks to it just to sort of give you a sort of a palette here. So this is actually similar to what we're going to put down. This is two inks mixed together. This is a straight application of one. This is straight application of another. That's those two mixed together, and then this is more of a raw color. So again, you could do sort of alien surfaces or different surfaces, or really create your own sort of color palette. This is actually sand applied down the middle, and this is what I would say I would put over this material if I the mixture that we're going to make. And the reason I use this is because it has enough density and it's fine enough grain that it's going to fill in any white spots. But if it's not going to be this thick and this dense, I'm probably not using it to cover over this pure white surface. I'm always going to treat it with a paint. So that's really important. Where we're going to get, and then we're going to work our way backwards to show you how we got here. So let's get that segment up and we'll come back in 1 minute. Okay, so first off, I'm well aware that this is disgusting looking and really looks like a pile of stuff. So this material right here, I don't claim to have a lot of original ideas or good ideas or anything like that, but this material that I have sort of discovered through manipulation of various materials and come up with this recipe, I want to tell you, has one cool factor. So you can see kind of how I can manipulate and move this stuff around, and yeah, it's kind of thick like oatmeal. I made this stuff a month ago, and I left it in that container that I showed you, and it's still super usable. Now, I mixed up a considerable amount for the Kashik project, but the cool thing is like, you aren't going to waste any of this material, and it stays really viscous and easy to manipulate, and I think you guys are going to like it in terms of an end result. So I put a lot on here, and I'm not going to need all this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time prepping or making this surface look amazing, but I'm just going to show you kind of what I do, and I'm just using a sculpting tool here to sort of brush this out. And again, I'm going to make this, I can make this as thick or as thin as I want, and again, you're going to need to have some dry time for this to really sort of set up. But I will tell you, if you thought the Celluclay was sort of like armor hard for your foam, This stuff is crazy. This will effectively make this terrain like bulletproof. And I know it's catching the light a little bright there, but it'll be a lot more evident when we get some ink on this. So again, try not to make too much of a mess. I'm going to brush it out on this because I don't want to get the mat too covered. So I'm just going to brush this out as sort of smooth or as flat as I want. Just sort of getting it thinned down, and I can do this with like larger tools or what have you. I just typically use this sculpting tool because I really like it. And again, just brushing this out continuously, get to the edge, sort of chop that sort of off, run that off the edge, get my excess, reclaiming my excess here. Again, try not to get too much on there. And the cool thing is you can pile this up and you can just manipulate it into to crevices and sides of buildings or along like a tree. You can also in this stage, if you want, go ahead and sort of sink some material into it, like rocks or logs or sort of any topographical feature that you want. You can sand this off later too. Like after all, it's effectively wood in its primary composition, and you can sand off your edges and all that good stuff when this sort of hardens out. So I'm just going to scrape off. I just want to kind of show you how thick or thin or how easy it was to manipulate this stuff. So I'm going to scrape off a considerable amount of this just because we really don't need all that. And again, just talking about the material, slam it back into your container, put that lid on, and then you could just use this later. Like I'm not sure the upper limits of this in terms of like how long it will last, but as I said, I mixed this up like well over a month ago when we were doing the ground cover for the Kashyyyk project. And then we just went out and applied it. Now, why did I save it? Well, one, I knew that somebody was eventually going to ask what that ground cover was and how to do it. But two, if you're doing projects at home and you have like, I don't know, I'm not saying you're gonna battle damage this because it's pretty hard to gamer damage this. But if you ever had to like do something else like a repair or better yet, if you end up like using this material here for a mini base, and you don't paint all your minis at once, or new releases come out later on, and you want to do a base up material that sort of matches the previous use scheme. Well, having this stuff ready to go, I mean, you can use your formula too, but just having something ready to go and base a unit to a month down the road or 2 months down the road, whether you didn't get to paint it or wasn't out yet, all that seems to sort of lend itself to a process where a product just lasts forever, effectively, as long as it's going to kind of stay moist. And you could always go back in if you do find, there we go. So I guess I did as I was rambling on. So I just went out and smoothed that out. Again, this is going to be a little bit different surface than what we had before. This is going to be a texturized surface that's going to take an ink like magic. You guys will love this. So I'm going to let this air dry for a few hours for sure. Probably speed that up a little bit, but if you can give this another half day, just to let that moisture come out, it's going to serve you well. And I know that that light picks up on that. It's effectively white at this point anyway. We're going to let that dry and get back at it. But as I was saying, that if you want to extend the life of this, or if you find it's a little dry because you've left it like a really long time, what I recommend doing is adding scenic cement, the liquid stuff that I showed you, because it's going to have the adhesive properties. The flex paste is going to stay in there. The weld bond's going to stay in there. You're just going to reactivate that a little bit. That wicking agent's going to penetrate through some of those surface levels and really rehydrate it and get it into a good mix. So that would be my suggestion if you do need to resoften or reactivate some of the sort of more gelatinous properties of this to get it back into something that you can work and manipulate. So we're going to leave this. We're going to come back the next stage. I'm going to kind of apply some inks. I'm going to do some various inks on there just to show you how quickly it will take those, and I will use specifically the ones that I use on the Kashyyyk project if you want to match up color or kind of replicate something along that line. And then I'm going to show you how to do some sand application and some flock application and sort of how to get those transitions. So we're really going to work from effectively the ground up. So stay tuned for that. All right, so we're now back here with the piece now having hardened up considerably, and you can see that we really have a nice a nice texture in here. You can see that we got this real sort of matted, cocoa matted forest floor, if you will. So what we're going to do with this sort of hard area, I kind of hear that. We're going to come in and just give it a treatment of ink. And so I brought the close cam in here. It may do a little bit of auto focusing hocus pocus here, but we'll do our best to sort of keep up with this. So I'm not going to do the whole thing on camera, but what I am going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of this down on here and just sort of give you a sense of how quickly and easily this is to sort of take an ink. And so you can see that I can dissipate that through rather quickly, and I can move it around as much as I want. This is going to have a nice surface to it, so if I want to leave it to pool, it's going to take up the wash really, really dark. If I want to move it around, I can do that because I have a really nice solidified sort of adhesive layer here that I can move and manipulate things above. So you can really see how that definition comes out super, super fast. Let me grab another little wash over here. This is the oh, there we go. This is the Vallejo immersion dip. This is the sepia wash here that I use a lot. I'm just going to go ahead and mix my brush in there. It's going to be fine. I'm going to come on this side and I'm just going to give a wash over here. Obviously, this is significantly darker. I'm going to go ahead and dissipate this throughout the piece here. I'm just going to move this out and brush this whole thing out as much as I can pull this first ink layer here, so you guys can see how dispersed that is, but you can really see how it can pocket up in those little pits in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just leave a section significantly less dispersed, nice and dark, and then you can see that as well. So you can really see, no matter what, it takes an ink quite nicely. I'm going to brush this over top of this previous layer that I laid down, and you're going to see, you know, that's going to change up that tone as well. Here, the dual layer there, the single, that's the single brush sepia, and then that's the thick one. So it doesn't really matter what you use. You don't have to use any of these colors. In fact, you could do it with an entirely different color. But the bottom line is you can see how nicely that takes an ink. So what I'll do off camera is I'll just sort of consolidate that, brush that out, let that dry. Then we'll come back in and I'm going to show you how to lay sort of sand or paste over the existing piece, and then I'll finally move on to the flocking when we finish up. But again, just super, super easy. I think you guys will really see the wow factor when you lay that ink, regardless of what you use, or wash, or even a contrast paint will work fine. Just lay it over there. It's going to pop. It's going to look great. You may even want to finish that as your ground cover in some exposed areas, and maybe don't even need to worry about covering it after that. Gameplay wise, surface wise, it's going to be great. It's going to look good, and it's going to have a real textured finish with very little work. All you got to do is do that mixture like I showed you in the previous step. So stay tuned. We'll get back to this when it's fully dry. All right. So you can see here now that we've got this all laid out, it's looking really, really sharp. You can see that we've accented a lot of this. We got good details, high, low tones. We got some warm areas and certainly some cool areas down here. And what we're looking for in this next step is we want to sort of create our unique landscape. But before we get there, I want to kind of sell you on the narrative that you can take this particular surface and even this coloration and go many places with it. You can employ sort of a scorched earth if you wanted and add some sort of black and red tones to this, so adding kind of a look of like a barren landscape or something similar. You could sell the forest floor look if you wanted to add some sort of greenery on here and some bushes. You could even go, you know, beach tones and add some sort of lighter greens and maybe some deeper greens in the shadows. You can go a lot of directions with this. I could have changed this more to a red tone and kind of go for an alien landscape again, sort of that tundra barren landscape. There's a lot of directions that I can take this particular piece of surface with. The bottom line is we got here with almost zero effort. Really, the inks did all the work. I piled it on and pulled it and pooled it in different areas, and then I just basically let it dry and give me this look. One of the things that you can do is while it's drying, if you go in with sort of a paper towel or something, some sort of adhesive material, you can start to sop up and soak up some areas, and you'll get even more variation in the tone. So if you want some like high areas and low low areas that are really contrasting, you can do that. Paper towel, Kleenex, something works there. Just be careful that you're using a blotting technique and not sort of rubbing it across the surface, because it will pick up on some of the more pointy and jagged areas and probably leave some residue. You don't want any white on here. We worked really hard to disguise that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come in and I'm just going to apply a little bit of the sand on here just to show you how you can apply a grit. Similarly, you could add a paste over this. We're not going to do a paste. I think I'm just going to use the sand and sort of show you the contrasting transition. So sort of bisect this piece. So one of the things that I do with sand application is I prefer to actually lay my sand directly on the surface that I'm looking to cover. One of the hard parts about this particular piece is it's going to be, I'm going to have a weird edge, so because I've sort of transitioned this edge quite sharply. So let's ignore the fact that it's not going to quite cover the edges. You would have this, not have this problem, as you'd have more area, and even on the edges we can go back in and add a second layer. But for the purposes of this, I'm just going to go ahead and add some sand in. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to sort of create a weird corner, if you will. So and sort of bring this out here and kind of create a U or a C shape here. So you can see that I'm actually transitioning the sand in. So I want the sand to have a gradient, as if the sand is sort of crept into this sort of surface that we have here, whatever surface I'm calling this. Let's just say this is a part of a jungle base or something similar. So you can see I've applied the sand first. I've chose not to add any adhesive. This is just my preferred method. I'm going to come in with some scenic cement here now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start solidifying this in, and I'm just using a drip technique here, and I really want to let it wick out into the sand. So I definitely want to go out into the transitions, because that's where I have that sand that I've placed down. And then what I do is I use the leading edge to leak my my scenic cement back in. I want that wicking effect. So hopefully that's appearing on camera for you guys. I want to be very careful not to create any drops. Let me do a drop right here and I'll show you why we don't want to do that. You see that right there? See how gross that is? Creates that real weird bubble. That we want to make sure we definitely don't do. And I'm going to show you how to get rid of that, so you can combat that, but it's not cool for one thing, and we want to try to avoid having to do that. So what you do is you need to overly saturate and flood that out, and that usually gets rid of it. I'm just going to go right to the edges here, because I'm going to show you how to take care of a board edge if you do in fact have one. I'll just do this board edge here. I'm not going to try to do the leading edge, because now that I've added some saturation in there, and I'm going to just hit this edge, and I want to try to, I don't want to have just that leading edge. I don't want to create any artificial lines. I'm going to go back in and sort of back blend that, and then I'm going to come in with some more scenic cement. I guess I'm getting my mat a little bit dirty here, but that's fine. And just hitting that out anywhere where I think I may have had some sand that I want to hit transitionally. There we go. And honestly, that is just what I need to do to get that saturated in. So I'm not concerned about extra, or any wicking out here. I'm going to take care of that in a sealing sort of layer. But that sand is now effectively going to be locked in. It's going to penetrate. So that scenic cement has a wicking agent. It's going to penetrate right through. It's going to evaporate out, and this should give us a really, again, a rock hard surface layer with a nice transition. So we're going to leave this, we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to come back again, and then we're going to get into the flocking. So stay tuned for that, guys. All right, so welcome back. We've now let the sand harden up. You can hear that we got a nice rock solid surface here, and we got this little bit of a transition. So you can kind of see how we've sort of captured in this little area that's feathered out. So however you want to do it, I'm just trying to make it a little bit unique here. So what we're going to do now is just add in our flocking, and we're going to do it in the method that I used on the Kashik table. So what I've done is I've sort of grabbed 3 flockings here. Now, these ones look really, really close, but they're actually a subtle difference. This one here is a little bit darker than this one. And then this one obviously is quite a bit lighter. This is referred to as an earth blend here. This one is, I think, let me see here. One is, green grass, and then the other one is another type of green grass. They're actually just two slight variations. As I said, this one is a touch lighter than this one here. So dark, lighter, and then lightest as we move through. So you want to find something that's really close in contrast. You don't want to go too stark. And then you want to find, I like this earth blend because what I do is I find it's a nice transition between sand and ground. Even if you have any browns or yellow tones, it really works nice. So for this, I'm obviously not applying it to the sand. We're going to reverse here. So we've already done the sand. Now we want to do the grass. And so I like to have the sand come over the ground and the grass come over the sand in most cases. I will sometimes have the sand come up into the grass as well. So we're going to sort of blend out the two and sort of have a little transition, because sometimes you have a little bit of sand that's blown into the grass, and then other times you're going to have sort of little sprigs of plant life that starts to proliferate up through the sand. So let's create a little bit of a gradient here. And then hopefully we'll have some, there we go, some nice focus pieces. So what we're gonna do is add a little bit of scenic cement again. Probably gonna bring the product shot up here for you so you guys can see that. And I wanna go ahead, I wanna go ahead and just start laying in the ground cover. So what I'm gonna do, unlike I did with the, unlike what I did with the sand, and hopefully that will, let's get a little focus on that. Unlike what I did with the sand, I'm actually going to saturate all of this space here. So, before we kind of like let it wick through, well, in this case, I'm gonna pre-soak the area. So coming in here and just getting it as wet as possible here. So really want this to saturate and build up. And I know it's going to drip onto my mat. That's fine. And so I'm going to come in and actually soak in the transition of that sand as well. Sort of just popping it in here. I'm not going to worry about going out too much, although I could have some areas I could have some grass kind of populating up in here, but I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. I just want to make sure I get a really good soak and saturation of this area, and that should be about right. I can add some more in later. Just want to really get that transition soaked. So I'm actually going to do a little bit of a back and forth here. So I do have the sand on standby. So what I'm going to do is come in with the darkest area, and I like to use a sprinkle technique. I talk about it all the time, and what I want to do is come into kind of what I refer to as like the heart of the ground cover, and I just want to get in there with a really deep and dense layer of the ground cover. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to feather it a little bit, but not too much, and I definitely don't want to have too much of this dark color escape this sort of heart area, if you will. So let me just see if I can get that to behave on my focus here. So sorry if it's not cooperating. I'll try to get that to work for you guys. Do these on the fly live, so I have to sort of troubleshoot as we go. So when I have this sort of like in the heart area, there we go. I want to make sure I get a deep saturation there, and then you can see I've left this sort of perimeter, and then obviously we can see the transition into the sand as well. So while that's sort of soaking and saturating, I now want to come in with my next layer, and I want to concentrate that primarily in the transitional area. So primarily just transitioning out that to cover as much of the ground as I want. So you can see that I've left it a little bit sparse, but you can really see we got that nice gradient already forming in there. Next up, you want to work fairly quickly in the sense that you don't want it to dry up too much. I'm going to come in with my transitional earth blend, and again, this is where I'm going to primarily focus on that transition area. Just getting it in there, highlighting out that transition, and a little sprig here and there on the heart, but not too much. And that is about as quick as it happens, and that's what you want to have. I think you would agree that we have this gradient now. We've taken over all the space that we really worked hard with that ink, but that ink's all about setting a sublayer. We've really transitioned that sand into this earth blend, into the light green, and then into the heart, and we've trailed in some of those sprigs. Now, if you want to, you can come in with a little bit of sand, populate it in here, just to create that back gradient a little bit, but you don't want to do too much, to be perfectly honest. And what I like to do is give it a little bit of a tap. You want to get that excess off. That's going to start solidifying right away. So you don't want to have a lot in there. And that's how quick it happens, folks, right there. Super quick transitional gradients, sand into your grass layer or whatever you want it to look like, but you can create those gradients 3 color. It's really important that you do that. Then you can create that tonal variation, dark, lighter green, slightly lighter, very subtle, and then that earth blend is super important. I cannot emphasize how important this is on almost every single color that you're going to use. This earth blend is fantastic. Cannot recommend it enough. I'll show you guys all those products on the side, of course. So I wouldn't recommend it if I don't like it. So yeah, that transition that's created really quick and easy. What we're going to do though, want to take this a step further. We're going to come in and I'm going to show you how to pop some plants in there, and also some tufts to create that gradient even more. But if you're just going to go for a standard wargaming surface, just real simple, something to game on, something to set up like modular terrain on, movable forests and such, like things like that, this is great surface. You can do all kinds of cool things like this. And just think about this too, right? Let's replace this sand and make it a road. This is a dirt surface, and you're going to have that transitional gradient from dirt into like the forest floor. Fine. So it doesn't have to be beach. It doesn't have to be into a forest. It could be mud. It could be, like I said, dirt road. It could even be like an asphalt surface or a concrete surface. You'll still have that sort of transitional gradient. So maybe it's gravel, and then you're transitioning with the earth blend into your darker tones, as long as you set up that tonal variation. Penetrate deep with your color. You want to make sure you have no sort of earth thrown through there. I'm not saying none, but I would definitely use that as my highest density. Feather it out, back feather it, golden. If you want to come in after and lock this down with another saturation, you can. Just keep in mind it's going to tonal. The tonal variation is going to darken down, just because that scenic cement will create a sort of deeper tone to that. You can do that. You can lock that in. You could give it a small matte overspray if you want to kind of lock it in a little bit without darkening it down too much. Whatever you want to do, whatever you need to set the tone. If you're going to heavy war game on this surface, and it's going to be something that you're going to be adding a lot of modular terrain, I'd lock it in with something like scenic cement. Give it another saturation. If you're just going to have this set up as like a quick dio, middle matte spray over the top. If you're really not even going to touch it ever, and you don't want to worry about creating any sort of mistakes at this point, you love it, just leave it. It's going to be fine. All that scenic cement. Remember what we did before is we penetrated it down, wick down into the surface, and then it evaporated up. Same thing's happening here. We set the tone down, we set it below, and now it's going to shoot up through this flock, and it's going to evaporate off, again solidifying this, the foam flocking right to the surface. So that's it, folks. We're going to leave that. We're going to let that dry. We're going to come back. We're going to fancy it up a little bit. Paint out at the edges black so it looks better. Take some final photos. You got the tutorial. All right, guys, we're back in with the final stage, and as you can see, we've finished everything up. We've added a lot of tufts in, and we've sort of just finished off this little vignette. It's basically just to show you how you can lay the groundwork and how you can get some really unique and I'd say realistic-ish transitions and natural vegetation on the ground here. So obviously we've used a series of tufts here in addition to our sand, our flock, and our ground paste. Don't forget, we started with that Celluclay layer, and we've really worked up from there, in about relatively speaking, about 45 minutes of work. Now obviously the larger area you're going to have more work, but you're just going to replicate exactly what you did here and replicate that across whatever size table or project you're working on. So I'll talk about the products that I used here, and as you guys have seen me before, I've laid tufts 100 times, so I didn't think you needed to see me lay them in this one. If you want to go back and check another video, you can obviously do that. But I really like how this came out, and I used a variety here just to show you what you can do and how dense you can make it look without making it look over the top. It looks the part here. So what I started with is a product you have not seen me use, and this is from Martin Wellberg. So I got sent these a while ago, and I just really didn't find a use for them or an application, but I do really like this. This is the what does he call it? The Tuft Weeds, and it's kind of this matting material. I'm definitely going to be a repurchaser of these. They're really fantastic. So you just tease these off and then put them in here. And you guys know that I use Gamer's Grass almost exclusively, but I wanted to give you another look and another product just to try in case you were curious. Now these come with a little bit more of a thick flocking on top of a sort of a weed-like base, so it's pretty spindly in application. You do have to be a little bit careful with them because they do tend to flatten out a little bit if you are overly aggressive with that. But I actually came in and laid that in and bulked out a large portion of this. This comes with this two-tone variation with this yellow, and so what I did is I added a few strong pieces in there, but then I just took some of this sort of debris that had shaken off. Actually took my finger, I brushed it over the scenic cement, over the existing plants that were here, and I just sort of gave it a little bit of a sprinkle, a little bit of a dusting, if you will, to give that look. But then of course I shifted over to my trusty Gamer's Grass, and I used 5 different colors on this one. So first of all, I've used these tiny tufts. I used these to sort of create the transitional elements. I should use my pointy stick here. These transitional elements, and you can see that I even have them out here in the sand just to give that light transition. Then I came in with the dry green here. Sorry about the glare. I used these as well, and I sort of just accented some of the previous laid yellow ones and transitioned that in just kind of along that area, right where we use that earth tone, that earth blend, if you will. And these two colors really accent that well. Then what I did is I used some of the strong green, and I used that to sort of fill the tones and accent the Martin Wellberg weed tufts. And so those are the strongest elements that you see sort of popping through here and there. Then I came in with some of the just plain green, it's called. Again, sorry about the glare. Push that down, just a straight green, and that came in and actually accented next to the strong green and a little bit of a transitional element into the ground cover that we had, something very close to the ground cover. And then finally I used the spiky green. I believe this is a spiky green. It's like a dry green color, almost an olive tone, and I used that to create this plant back in here. So you can see as I kind of lift that up and bring it more to the overhead, I use that as a sort of an off tone. So this is definitely a plant, and the rest is definitely going to be our grasses transitioning from this tall plant down in this sort of gradient as we shift to the beach and get those sort of transitional elements. So there you have it. I'll have some photos at the end just to show you, but fairly simple. This is how I did the groundwork on the Kashyyyk project. This is how you can do your groundwork in the future, regardless of project. Sand, mud, it doesn't matter. Texture sand, that also doesn't matter. As long as you kind of set up that transitional gradient both with your ground cover and your flocking, I think that you'll get something that looks and feels pretty natural. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I know this is a bit of a longer one. I think I owed you guys that one. And so hopefully you're able to take some of these skills, these sort of application techniques, and apply them to your future projects. So thanks for watching, guys. And as always, thanks for the support. I appreciate the Patreon. I know it's a slow grow. It's a slow grow process for me, but we don't sacrifice anything in terms of quality or production here for you guys, regardless of the community. I do really appreciate that, and I hope to see you guys in next month's tutorial. Thanks for watching.